Good evening. Thanks for being here, and welcome to the 2024 Zena Sutherland Lecture. I am Shelley Hughes, the Director of Children's Services and Family Engagement here at the Chicago Public Library, and on behalf of the Library Commissioner, Chris Brown, the Zena Sutherland Committee, I'm so glad to have you all with us in the beautiful Pritzker Auditorium here at Harold Washington Library, or from the comfort of your home if you're joining us from the Zoom. So we're so glad to have you here with us. Chicago Public Library's motto is read, learn, and discover, and I'm so glad that you'll be our partner in learning and discovering about reading tonight. So I would like to give some thanks before we get started. First to the Sutherland Committee, who so thoughtfully plan this lecture every year and have been doing so for, I believe, 43 years? 43? 42 years. Oh my goodness. Well, let me not age the committee prematurely. I also really want to give a huge thanks to the Children's Services and Family Engagement staff here at the Chicago Public Library, my team, especially Alexa Hamilton, who've done all the logistics of making this evening work. And now, y'all can't see them, but the folks way back there in the back, that's our corporate and private events team here at the Chicago Public Library. They're the ones who put on all of our big events that happen in this space. So if our microphones are working and the lights are on and you can see me, it's all because of them. So thank you all so much. Now, a few housekeeping announcements. If you're joining us here in person, now if you're on Zoom, you can tune out for a minute. The exits are behind you. If you're here in the auditorium, there's one on each side of the building, and then the washrooms are right across the lobby. After the lecture, we'd love to invite you up to our grand lobby, which is one floor above us, for a reception. So thank you all so much for being here. Now, I'm here to introduce, via video, Roger Sutton, formerly of the Hornbook, who's going to give a little bit of an introduction to this lecture, its history, and to Zena Sutherland, for whom it's named.
Many of the librarians and teachers in the audience tonight would be able to tell you about the one professor who pointed them toward a career bringing children and books together, who in fact is the reason they are here tonight. For me and for any number of other librarians, including Carla Hayden, the current Librarian of Congress, that professor was Zena Sutherland, who taught children's and young adult literature at the University of Chicago's Graduate Library School from 1972 until her retirement in 1986. She served even longer as editor of the Bulletin of the Center for Children's Books, assuming that position in the late 1950s. Now, I don't know what you civilians think happens in a children's literature class, but try to picture a tiny blonde woman in a psychedelic shift dress, chain-smoking Carltons, while an entire room of grad students hung on her every word. She used her own textbook, Children and Books, which she had taken over from Grande Dame Mayhill Arbuthnot, but that comprehensive book was just the structure on which Zena built a bravura performance that was one part wisdom, one part common sense, and one part stand-up, along with a running commentary that contained some of the juiciest gossip in the children's book business, all delivered in a whiskey contralto. She was also patient and kind and helpful with her students, who imbibed Zena's unsentimental approach to bringing children and books together, and her openness to the great changes that were happening in books for young people in the 1960s and 70s. Zena's students, and in subsequent years, their students, spread the Zena gospel far and wide. As Zena's retirement approached, two of her doctoral students, Marilyn Kay and Betsy Hearn, who would succeed Zena in 1985, planned a surprise. Secretly, they had solicited and edited essays from just about everybody who was anybody in children's books at the time. Ursula Nordstrom, Susan Cooper, Virginia Hamilton, Lloyd Alexander, Arnold Lobel, and more, and put them all in a book complete with a cover by Zena's great pal, Maurice Sendak. That book, celebrating children's books, Essays on Children's Literature in honor of Zena Sutherland, was published in 1981 by Lothrop Lee and Shepard, and all of its proceeds were donated by the publisher, contributors, and Marilyn and Betsy to establish the Zena Sutherland Lecture. Zena died in 2002, but we are happy to continue this lectureship series in her honor. On behalf of the Sutherland Lectureship Committee, I would like to thank Betsy and Marilyn for getting this going, the University of Chicago, the Chicago Public Library, and the Hornbook for their steadfast support, our faithful audience for coming back year after year, the publishers who helped make each lecture evening possible, and the authors and illustrators who have given us so much insight into not only their own craft, but into the value young people's literature brings to our culture as a whole. Militant atheist Zena will probably get me for saying this, but I hope she is up there smiling. Thank you.
Thank you to Shelley and Roger. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us here and virtually tonight. My name is Alina Rivers, and I'm very excited to be part of the Zena Sutherland Lecture Committee. Meg Medina is a Cuban-American who grew up in Queens, New York. While she did not grow up with many books in her home, she heard many stories from her family and enjoyed writing. Books and writing found a thread in her life as she became a teacher, a freelance journalist, and a grant writer. And it was later in life that she took that brave step to connect the love of children, of writing, and of books to create picture books, chapter books, and novels that have embraced the complexities of growing up. As an author, Meg Medina's work spans the age ranges from young readers to young adults. She says about writing for all ages, "Every age has its own way of being magical and tragic, and I love to write about all of it." Her works have included the Ezra Jack Keats New Writer Award for her picture book, Tia Isa Wants a Car, the Charlotte Zolotow Award for Evelyn Del Rey's Moving Away, her Pura Belpré Honor Book, Mango, Abuela and Me, and Pura Belpré Award Book, Yaqui Delgado Wants to Kick Your Ass, also recently released as a graphic novel. Newbery Award-winning Mercy Suarez Changes Gears, the first of the Mercy Suarez trilogy. She has authored books for the She Persisted series featuring Sonia Sotomayor and Pura Belpré, which she co-authored with Marilisa Jimenez Garcia. As an advocate, Meg uses her speaking and writing gifts to share stories of Latino youth and girls and to uphold the importance of literacy, reading, and libraries. Recently, she served as honorary chair of the 2024 National Library Week, where she encouraged everyone to find their place in the library and to make the library a part of their life. As the Library of Congress's 2023-24 National Ambassador of Young People's Literature, Meg's 2-year term features her platform, Cuéntame, Let's Talk Books, which brings an opportunity to encourage connection among families, classrooms, libraries, and communities by talking about books. She has called herself a kids' reading companion, helping kids engage in reading for enjoyment and sharing their reading experiences with others. She knows that children's literature is important because it's a way to invite children to talk about their experiences of hope and loneliness, fear, and accomplishment. Meg considers her own experiences to bring an element of humanity and truth to her work and to help children and teens figure out who they are as human beings. Her stories respect their intellect and their capacity for compassion. It is truly my honor to introduce a distinguished and prolific author and advocate. Please join me in welcoming Meg Medina.
Wow. Okay, clicker, let's do this. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for that really lovely introduction. I very much appreciate the honor of being asked to speak tonight and to join this really beautiful tradition. My deepest gratitude to the Chicago Public Library, the Zena Sutherland Committee for that yummy dinner together this evening, and the University of Chicago for handling all the many details that it took to make tonight's event. So I want to start this evening by offering us a roadmap. My talk is called Digging in the Graveyard. So, that's me way back then. I have been dedicated to writing for children since about 2006, when I began drafting my first middle grade novel, Milagros Girl from Away, which was ultimately published by Henry Holt Books for young readers in 2008. In the years since then, a lot has happened. I have written 10 titles, I think soon to be 11, which have received many kind recognitions. And as you know, for the last year and a half, I have had the great honor of serving as our country's 8th National Ambassador for Young People's Literature. I will conclude my term this December already with the new ambassador installed in January. I recap all of this to underscore the obvious fact that I have been afforded a very wide platform. And as a result, I have had many opportunities to talk about my work. And as any Google search will quickly reveal, I have done so much talking. I have spoken at conferences and award ceremonies. I've been guests on podcasts and have had pieces in media outlets. I've provided origin stories for my books. I've unpacked my thoughts on thorny issues of diversity and inclusion. I've offered thoughts on crafts of writing. I've revealed parts of my life that have been put into my writing. There are literally hours of me talking. And that is to say nothing of the current endless supply of short-form video on Instagram and TikTok, where in 1-minute clips you can see everything from me unboxing my latest book to sharing my favorite flan recipe. So when I received this invitation, I thought, what an honor, and it was quickly followed, but what is there left to say? So what I have planned tonight is not a look back, but rather a look forward. Instead of going backward, we're going to look at my time as ambassador and what I want to do in the remaining 6 months. Then I'd like to turn to a picture book and a novel that are coming up, both of which were worked on heavily during the pandemic. And I hope the discussion of how I worked on those will reveal where I am at this precise moment in my creative life as an author, what I have learned the hard way, and how I plan to greet the second half of my career in a way that I hope will make it as meaningful and as exciting as the first half has been. So let's just start with the ambassadors. So I am the 8th person, as I said, in this role, the last in a very distinguished line. It is an immense honor and an act of service to the nation's children. It's a delicate task to represent both the Library of Congress and every child a reader properly as well. And this is not, as my very wise predecessor, Jason Reynolds, told me, like a medal that you keep shiny in your cabinet. He said to me, oops, what did he say to me? Come on now. It's not advanced. Oh, there he is. You're going to work, Meg. So he was kind enough not to mention the biggest first challenge, which was, of course, how to follow him. Because Jason, as you may know, is larger than life, a generational voice, an aspirational speaker, in short, cool on 2 feet. But we do share one common trait that I think shaped our work as ambassadors. Both of us had to deal with the repercussions of the COVID pandemic. Jason's term was severely interrupted and occurred a great deal online, which is why his term was very rightfully extended an extra year. And my term has been one that has revealed the very high price our young people paid during the pandemic. It's meant working with schools and parents and libraries and kids as they try to reset. As the collective community of caregivers for children, we have all tried to return to face learning loss, not only in academics, but also in social and emotional development. So my term has meant meeting children after a period of time where many had begun to check out. The job then has been to re-engage them in their literary lives in a way that feels especially painless and does not overwhelm them. The job has been to make books and reading a tool in how to knit themselves back together. That sounds awfully big, but I have learned to balance the gravitas of that role with my inner silliness. This is from my inauguration day, as I posed with my agent and editor as Charlie's Angels. We were standing next to the Stradivarius violins, and here having a wonderful laugh with the national treasure, Dr. Carla Hayden. My platform is Cuéntame, and here are some highlights, brief highlights of what I've learned on this quest to make the position something more than just ceremonial. Having a bilingual platform, Cuéntame, Let's Talk Books, invited readers of multiple languages and backgrounds. This felt urgently necessary to me, since anti-immigrant rhetoric runs high these days, and kids internalize those hateful characterizations. I wanted to offer an alternative, and as far as I know, it has been well received, and for that I'm immensely grateful. Returning joy to reading has felt essential too. Cuéntame has been about helping kids talk about books outside the school way of talking about them, which includes typically vocabulary tests and reading journals, high-stakes end-of-year exams. I model for them ways to book talk with energy and joy, like the library pros at CCBC in Wisconsin, the undisputed masters of the book talk. I've seen firsthand how a 1-minute book talk between two people almost always leads to conversation and reveals things that the book talker and the listener have in common. Relationship is built, not just with the book, but with each other. So book talking becomes a form of social practice, of speaking practice, and of course, a support for reading. Libraries have been at the core of my work, specifically trying to close the perceived divide between school libraries and public libraries. I targeted communities where they could demonstrate that there was a partnership being built there between the two. And because video is a powerful force for this generation of readers and parents, I spent a lot of time making Instagram videos highlighting the cool things that I've found in the school and public libraries that I've visited. Why? To help families realize what's available to them in their own neighborhood and for free. We have so many great programs that are often so heartbreakingly underutilized by the community. What's the secret sauce on the successful spaces? I have visited libraries where I've had to crawl through a tunnel to get to the picture books, where I have been able to check out an American Girl doll if I wanted, or the latest gaming console system. The name of the game has seemed to be connection and energy. These have been the libraries that have taken stock of what their community really wants and designed programming to reflect that. They use innovative outreach beyond flyers and website listings to engage people. And above all, they seem malleable. There is enthusiasm in the staff. There's a dynamic feeling, like a busy beehive, Here's just a quick view of me in Newburgh. I don't know if that's going to work if we have to advance that one. Does it work, tech gods? That's a very fetching still of me. If it doesn't work, we're just going to go ahead and move on. So I do, that's a sample, but it should be moving and me talking. Okay, so because I live, I'm fortunate that I live 2 hours from Washington, D.C. I have visited Washington, D.C. often. One thing I did is that I had to go visit Congress to express support for libraries, which was mostly a goodwill effort, which is a scarce commodity sometimes on the Hill, so I was glad to do it. I feel like my time there, although it was brief, put a face at least to a person who was pulling for libraries for them. But far more exciting for me than visiting Congress, although that was exciting, was instituting office hours with the public. So I think Gwendolyn Brooks, as poet laureate, was the first to institute public hours. And the idea to me seemed perfect. It was a perfect way for families to come meet me and talk about their reading lives in person. I wanted also to demystify the Library of Congress, which feels so fancy and imposing. It's not a place where you feel like ordinary people, mere mortals like us, should dwell. But kids have been so magical there. They've been so memorable. And getting to talk to families about their reading lives has been illuminating. I've observed that the most successful reading families, so to speak, are the ones where they pass the books along among themselves, sharing the things that they've enjoyed. I don't have a picture of Basil, Bixby, and a little boy named Twig, because the father's name was Branch. They came to visit me. Yes, they were adorable. And they were just like that. The younger siblings accepting recommendations from the eldest, and mom and dad fond of reading comic books and attending book events as a family whenever they could. But I learned too that sometimes reading can flourish even in the absence of parental reading habits. It was more a question of attitude, and that took me by surprise. What was more essential was sort of this open attitude about introducing books into the home. The girls in the middle are from a family from El Salvador, and they did a visit with me in a combination of Espanol and English. The mother only spoke Spanish, the girls were bilingual. The mother confessed to me that her parents in El Salvador could not read or write. She, an immigrant here, could read, she said, to defend herself, and never for recreation. But she marveled with utter pride at her daughter, one a 12-year-old STEM dynamo, and the other a first-grade fan of Dogman, who read and loved reading and who wanted big things for themselves, like careers in medicine and astronauts and the like. Speaking with them, I could see reading's life-changing impact and the importance not so much of the parents' own ability, but their openness to accepting new habits. So in my final months now, as part of Cuéntame, I'm doing a series of short-form video chats with 18 to 20 book authors who were creating work during my time. I can't tell you who they are yet. That will drop May 14th. Follow my socials, as they say. The horror was selecting participants from the hundreds of talented colleagues that I have. And of course, the details of getting these people to DC to film was another logistical tangle. But my hope for the video series is that it elevates children's literature beyond the persistent devaluation of these works outside of our own kidlit community. It persists. I want kids and teachers and families to get to know some of the many incredible people who truly treasure children and offer them their very best creative effort to support young people's journey. These videos will remain in the Library of Congress's archive forever. And I'm so pleased to think that 50 years from now, people will be able to hear their voices and see their faces and know about their work at our nation's most prestigious library. Please be on the lookout for them, May 14th, and share them widely as they begin dropping. So my time as ambassador has been intensely gratifying and also exhausting. I will be very tired and very sad when it comes to an end. Cinderella's coach will be back to a pumpkin. And I wonder how that's going to be, the sudden halt of this pace. And I'm plagued by the question I often face when I'm writing a novel, only now it's my own life. And then what happened? The answer is I don't know, except that one plus is that I will leave the work and the work part, and be able to turn to my creative life, which has been hard to concentrate on these days. I hope that I'll leave with a sense of completion of an important duty at a time when kids were feeling frail. When my family arrived to this country in the early 60s, they were frail. They were in the midst of a turbulent loss of their own country and family. And while the immigrant journey in this country was difficult for them, they lived with an undying appreciation and gratitude to this country for opening its doors to them in their hour of need. I hope my service has been a small way to return this favor. But even more, I fervently hope that my advocacy and example will serve as a strong reminder of the many positive outcomes offered by newcomers to our country, including those who are arriving right now, today, in their own dire hour, and who need our support. So let's turn to my writing life. In September, I will publish this book, a new picture book called No More Señora Mimi, or in Spanish, No Más Señora Mimi, which has been beautifully illustrated by Brittany Chickasee, who I insist on calling Chichese, but it is Chickasee. I began drafting this book in the winter of 2020, a couple of months before COVID sank its ugly fangs. And I began editing it with Kate Fletcher in the late fall of 21. And a quick peek, you can find the trailer around. Brittany is a fairly new illustrator. And can I add a librarian? So it feels like our collaboration during my tenure was a perfect fit. But what stood out above all was Brittany's illustrations could capture subtle emotion in the small moments and bring it all to life. No More Señora Mimi focuses on a small moment in a child's life, a shift in perspective that reveals her wide capacity to love. This is a tale about Ana, a little girl who's happy about no longer needing her babysitter until she comes face to face with the reality of what losing her will actually mean. If they're lucky, children are raised by many, many people, not just their biological families. They're raised by friendly neighbors and by good teachers. They're raised by their friends' parents, by their scout leaders, their community center leaders, and increasingly by daycare workers and home care providers. What is also true, according to the Urban Institute, is that much of the child care being provided in our country is by Black and brown women who do this essential work for very little salary and usually no benefits except time with the little ones. Childcare, then, remains a huge problem for our nation, both for those who need it and those who provide it. It is both unaffordable for working families, and it is also low-paying for those who provide the service. So does this make its way into the book? If nothing else, I have learned the power of drawing children's lives realistically. I show the facts of their lives with a lens, though, that feels appropriate to their age. So, while No More Señora Mimi is about a little girl changing her mind about firing her babysitter, it's also a story that lays out a very specific cultural and social reality. No More Señora Mimi is set in an apartment building, not a neighborhood of single-family homes. It features a Latina-led household. Ana lives with Mami. Señora Mimi is an in-home caregiver who lives upstairs and has her own little one to care for. I use bon instead of hopscotch. The snacks are buttered Cuban crackers, a favorite of Pancho, the toothless terrier. These are small choices that I have learned are massively important to children, families, and authors who wish to be seen in their full humanity on the page. So to my fellow writers who are also writing very culturally specific stories, I say, keep it up. It's the truth, and the truth is the right way forward. My mother was a working single mother her whole life in this country. That's me and Ma and Lydia. In those early days, after her arrival from Cuba and her divorce from my father, she moved to New York City and found work. And while babysitting was not really a thing that was done, I had to be left in the care of another Cuban lady named, you guessed it, Mimi. Like Ma, Mimi was a recent arrival who lived in a building a few blocks away. She spoke no English, and being in her older retired years, she found that she still needed some extra money to make ends meet. So she ran a babysitting side hustle from her apartment for several of us kids in the neighborhood. Mimi was plump and had dyed red hair and freckles. Her first-floor apartment had a living room filled with things that we kids could look at but not touch, which she considered a very important skill to teach. She liked buttered Cuban crackers and taught me how to dunk them into sweetened milk with a dash of coffee. And together we watched the same soap operas and listened to the same radio stations I heard at home. And the only downside was that she made me take naps on a mat in her foyer, which I hated. It was a comfort for my mother to be able to leave me with someone she could communicate with, and someone who didn't charge too much for peace of mind. But what I most remember about the Mimi years was the day in 1968 that my mother received word that her parents and her sisters had finally been granted exit visas from Cuba. Viene tu familia. Your family's coming, she told me. Abuela will be your babysitter now. Excited and buzzy-headed at the curious news, I fired Mimi right that day. Lo siento, Mimi, I told her gravely, but I don't need you anymore. I have a real grandmother now. She laughed to her last gold tooth and told me that she'd miss me. So fast forward a couple of years to age 7, my Holy Communion. There's a picture of Mimi. She's the one in the blue dress and the white gloves. I love this photo. Mimi had, first of all, very large, sort of thick hands, as I recall. So how they fit in those gloves, I will never know. But what is more important is that she is standing here with my aunts and my grandmother. Mimi didn't go anywhere after the ruthless firing at my hands. Instead, she became fast friends with my family, a bond created among women who were all new and frightened of this country and all trying to help one another get ahead. They remained fast friends over a lifetime. I was to learn that being part of a Cuban community offered a lifetime membership into a group that supported you forever. Preteen and teenage Meg rolled her eyes at the old ladies and didn't much want anything to do with her old babysitter who laughed too loud and wore those knee-high stockings even with dresses. But today, I can see the beauty in Mimi so brightly. Community and love are at the heart of the story, and that's universal. And it's what children need to feel safe. So I'm glad to offer this story to kids right now, and I'm glad to offer a story that invites all caregivers in a child's life to be seen and celebrated. I am really curious to see how kids will relate to this story and what stories they will bring back to their classrooms about their babysitters. I'm eager, too, to hear from the caregivers themselves about their experiences in loving and shaping children who are not, in the strictest terms, their own. And finally, I am very excited to see how this book might help bring the expertise of families and caregivers into the classroom as part of literacy activities. How can we empower childcare providers and families to use their lived experiences as the groundwork for growing healthy children who are readers? Now, I'm going to turn to a longer work that you're not going to see until 2025. I told you, this is the future. Graciela in the Abyss will be an illustrated middle grade fantasy with illustrations by the award-winning Balbuso twins, Ana and Elena, who are sisters, an artistic design duo who live in Milan. The setting is the deep ocean, the abyssal zone, to be precise, far away from the reaches of the sun. Almost everyone in the story is dead. Sounds cheery, doesn't it? Not really what one might offer to help kids feel safe and secure, but hang with me. I want to do a deep dive, no pun intended, into this title because of 3 important facts. 1, it has taken me 15 years to write it. 2, COVID and massive personal grief were key to writing it. And 3, it forced me to relearn an essential truth about writing. I guess the best place to start is with a small confession about one of my many writing quirks. As I write a book, I keep something called the graveyard. The graveyard is a grisly and sad place. It's where I keep abandoned work that I found too hard to write. Sometimes it contains sections that my editor asked me to take out of a manuscript. And since I can't bring myself to tell her she was right, or to delete things that I have spent hours and days and months on, I keep them there, buried, but not exactly gone. Like most graveyards, it's a place I only visit occasionally, usually when I'm despondent and at a loss, or when I'm making another deposit, so to speak. But every so often, I come back in a different role, that of grave robber, and that is how it was for Graciela in the Abyss. Back in 2010, I was a very new author with only one book to my name. It was Milagros, as I said, Girl from Away, published by Henry Holt, and it hadn't done well in sales. And now I was facing the horrible sophomore challenge. The book I wanted to write was a fantasy novel about two ghost girls, one of whom is captured and robbed of the pearl teeth that grow inside her mouth. Her companion, Graciela, finds herself alone and hiding in a cave, and she must figure out how to save her friend. That's all I knew. There was something I wanted to say about friendship, about what was precious, but each time I sat down to write it, it turned to ash. This was not for a lack of trying. I took it with me to writing groups, one that I belonged to with Eric Elfman for a while. But still, I found myself with no story. So I buried it, and I vowed to move on and forget about it. My publishing life, I want to just show you all the years I started to circle. I'm not lying. I really have been working on this. My publishing life, though, was beginning to look kind of sunny. Tia Isa Wants a Car and Yaqui Delgado had both earned nice awards. But ironically, as my career bloomed, my personal life was slowly unraveling. My mom had died of cancer in 2013, just before the publication of Yaqui Delgado Wants to Kick Your Ass. I remembered that I did the copy edits to that novel in her hospital room during one of her surgeries. But after she died, she left behind her youngest sister in my care, Tia Isa, the same Tia Isa of Tia Isa Wants a Car fame. They had both come to live with me during my mother's final 18 months, and after my mother's death, obviously, Isa stayed on. For most of my life, Isa never lived farther away than a few blocks. But as the years ticked by, Isa's needs truly intensified until in 2019, there was no longer any way for me to meet her needs with just hired home health assistants. So we made the really difficult choice to move her to a facility a few blocks from my house where I could visit daily, and where her home health aide, Maria, could continue to go every day to help bathe and dress and feed her. It was a difficult time. I was trying to power through my publishing career without thinking and feeling too much. I hadn't been able to grieve my mother's passing because there was no time. And I found that I still could not afford the luxury. Seeing my aunt in a nursing home, generally a taboo state in Latino culture, left me feeling guilty and in despair no matter how often I visited. And that's to say nothing of the exhaustion that came from caring for her daily and dealing with the million things that go wrong in a skilled nursing facility. And then in 2020, COVID appeared in our lives, and the bottom fell out of my world. Unfortunately, this nursing facility became infamous nationally for its unusually high number of COVID deaths. 9 people, 19, 30, 49 by April alone. I think the number ended up around 80. And while Isa did not die specifically of COVID, she did suffer the acute neglect that the pandemic brought on as the staff grew ill and the quality of care dwindled to almost nothing. I will spare you all the specifics, and I will only say that Isaida Gregoria Metauten died alone in her room in August 2020. My mother's death years earlier, along with Isa's death, and my mother-in-law's passing also that same year, left a chasm inside me. I was not going to miss managing the details of illness, but the voices of the elders was gone. They had vanished. Spanish was gone from my daily life, along with my connection to Cuba and all the relatives and the stories of the before. I felt unmoored, and there were the regrets that came knocking at night, memories of my mom's last days that I had blocked out, memories of knocking on Isa's window at the nursing home when we were stopped from entering, and then the utter rage that I felt that I hadn't been able to give the people that I loved a better or easier end. Death was everywhere that year, on the news, in refrigerated trucks that held corpses, and government tallies. My daughter Sandra, here, became a nurse in February before COVID began, and she was assigned to the COVID unit as her first gig, when the mortality rate was soaring and there was no vaccine in sight, all of which kept me up and pacing at night. I wasn't alone, of course. This whole nation was facing death and mourning. Some of you in this room probably have hair-raising stories of your own. Collectively, as a nation, we were in terror, hunkering in our homes as best we could. Among writing creatives, so many of us found we couldn't write. The pandemic was, and in some cases continues to be, an ordeal that exacted a heavy price in lives and learning, in emotional health and economics and trust in our ability to feel hope. Children lost friends and loved ones and just the ordinary pleasure of growing up. Everything precious seemed at risk. And of course, our national rancor and discourse climbed. So as 2021 rolled around, I was beginning to feel haunted. I desperately needed a place where I could escape the forces that seemed bigger than what I could control. I needed to make sense of the rage and the fear that was everywhere around us. I needed to come to terms with my regrets. I needed to find a sense of hope again, even in this dark time. And I needed to think about what really makes us go on when we don't want to. So, my friends, I went to the graveyard to search among the bones that I had buried. Fun fact about Meg Medina. I love the beach. I walk beaches. I collect shells. I read in the surf. I build sand castles. To this day, also turtles and mermaids. Every chance that I get, there is something about the ocean that offers me a deep sort of psychological rest. And it gives me a place to deposit my worries and revitalize it when I need it the most. Coincidentally, I share a birthday with a famous oceanographer, Jacques Cousteau. I don't know when I came to that fact about Jacques Cousteau, but I know it was during childhood because I used to tell people and because I remember that it made me feel special. And I decided that it somehow explained my love and connection to the ocean. Anyway, when I went back to the graveyard, I reached for a story with a setting in a place that was a comfort to me. I opened the file called Graciela, and I read the many versions of Graciela that I had worked on since 2010. I tried to write it from Graciela's point of view, and then from this boy Jorge's point of view, from the first person present and the third person past. I tried it as a poem. There were so many different titles. Ay, ay, ay. But I realized this one thing, that I hadn't given much thought to the setting which suddenly seemed pivotal. My auspicious birthday notwithstanding, I knew astonishingly little about the ocean, actually, besides the fact that I love it. So slowly I began to research, discovering that the sea goes down between 2 and 7 miles, depending on the ocean. That the deepest part, of course, is the Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench. And when we think about ocean depths, we use pelagic zones, that is, waters away from the shore measured by depth and characterized by light's reach and the life forms that reside in each of those zones. You can see that sunlight ends at about 1,000 meters down, and then the abyssal zone begins, and there is darkness, or at least darkness from anything shining above. As part of my research, I began to read books which were specific to women scientists who worked in the sea, specifically with a focus for the abyss, the deep, deep regions. What do we know about the abyss? Turns out almost nothing. It's a place that is as inhospitable to exploration, perhaps much the same way that the deepest spaces inside of us resist excavation and reckoning too. But the abyss, like people, is full of mystery. And slowly, all of this reading began to create a firm setting in my mind, a sense of place and characters. I cannot recommend enough the books by Dr. Witter and Jill Heinerth. They're memoirs, sort of, but packed with facts of what these scientists have seen. And as such, an exploration, they're books that are not so much an exploration of the mysterious ocean, but also an exploration of each woman. In each account, I marveled at these women who did not fear the darkness, who in fact faced it and made it their calling. And you may know this map. It's famous, by Bruce Hazine and geologist and oceanographer Marie Tharp, who was named by the Library of Congress as one of the most influential cartographers of the 20th century. This is the first complete map of the ocean floor, published in 1977, which seems shockingly recent. But this helped prove the theory of plate tectonics, which as late as the 60s was ridiculed. They called her a hysterical female for having those ideas. Again, I marveled at her tenacity, since she began her work in the 40s, when it was still believed that the sea floor was utterly barren. Her life's work, though, would show that the ocean beneath us is marked by mountain ranges and canyons and valleys, that there are lakes and chimneys, and life exists even in utter darkness. So now I began the world building for my story. I could imagine this utter darkness of the abyss. I could feel its winding caves, how they opened up like porous sponges. I could feel those tight twists and turns and undiscovered canyons. I started to consider the sheer scale of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which is an immense mountain range, 10,000 miles in the shape of an S, from the Arctic Ocean all the way down to the southern tip of Africa. I thought of shipwrecks and whale falls and all the beings, human and otherwise, that find their end in the sea, how they are recycled and reborn in a way and become part of the endless pattern of the world. I marveled at the ideas of lakes and underwater waterfalls, an entire ecosystem growing along those noxious, overheated gas chimneys, churning, churning, and churning. I pored over the photographs of the life forms being discovered, each looking like a Hollywood monster, all rising from the depths at sunset each night, to feed as the darkness in the water expands. In the ocean is where the largest migration of animals on Earth occurs. But what snagged my attention the most was the issue of bioluminescence. These are the displays that look like neon signs with all their gaudy blinking, chasing lights. The flashes provide protection and disguise during the nightly migration. It's a sort of language in the deep. But mostly, what I loved about it is that it is light that is made inside oneself by necessity. The creatures that find themselves enveloped in darkness cannot count on the sun to shine on them. Instead, what dwells in an abyss must make its own light. So I began drafting a story about two children, Graciela, a ghost, and Jorge, a living boy, reluctant companions who are each struggling with darkness in their world and inside themselves. Growing up can feel like an abyss, especially in a pandemic. It's a time filled with winding caves that can lure you in and get you lost. It's filled with unknown and noxious forces. And above all, coming of age is a process of figuring out how to activate your inner light and how to use it. It's an act of learning how not to depend on something else to illuminate you, but to do it yourself. The search for that light and the ability to believe in it and manage it is necessary for your survival. What blocks our ability to feel illuminated? My answer at the moment that I was writing this book was despair does, and regrets, and mistakes, and bad luck. But how do we find our light again when that happens? I decided to let Graciela and Jorge struggle to find out. Now, a few things have always been true of me as a writer. The first thing is that I resist plotting and outlining, which for me ruins the fun. The second is that I write from a place of total uncertainty. I am never sure that I'm going to find a book inside what I'm working on. In the beginning, I am not at all sure what I'm going to say or what I mean to say. I mostly start with characters and more or less let their strengths and weaknesses guide me through their general problem. This means that I am also a really nervous and slow writer, notoriously unsure of myself and nitpicky. I find it very difficult to write a terrible passage and skip around with a vow to come back to the section, although that is great advice, and I often give that to my students at Hamlet. So I am always searching for some way of knowing that I'm on the right track, and at this point in my career, this is a problem. There is a strange dilemma I have. It feels like there are fewer and fewer people with whom I can share my early, terrible attempts. My early versions, before Kate weighs in on them, before I have a chance to wrestle things to the ground, are often too wordy and meandering. They don't make sense. I repeat whole sections. They're too complicated. But who can help me? The friends I do trust to see my bumps and boils are all busy writing their own work. How can I ask them to make time in their busy lives to read mine? So the work on this novel has been hard. I don't write fantasy usually, and I'm not an expert at world building. It took many more back and forth rounds with Kate to get it to our mutual satisfaction. And each round, my self-doubt kept spiking. But That is what brought me to an understanding that I could not have had in 2010, and that is that you will always be using new strategies. 1, faux outlining. This is outlining that you don't want to admit is outlining. I drew a bell curve, and I plotted the major ascending and descending action points, and I made little family history trees for the characters. But since there were no Roman numerals, I said, this is not an outline. I drew a map of the abyss because I love opening storybooks and finding a map on the inside of the page. But I'm a terrible artist. But anyway, here is the map of the abyss where they make their home. I ordered sea glass in the mail for tactile help because Graciela's job in the ocean is that of glacier. And I lived this book. Here I am on my annual vacation in 2022 making a sea collage on the deck from magazines. All to say that all these years into my career, I found myself having to adopt practices that were new to my writing skill set. I'd heard them talked about for others, but had never done them really myself. I had to let myself feel like a beginner again and see everything about the writing process with completely fresh eyes. So as I was shaping this book, the book was shaping me as a writer. Each book teaches us. By the time, oh, that's the finished map. It looks much better when they do it. By the time this novel is in your hands next summer, it will have taken me 15 years. It will be a book I honestly can say I could not have written in 2010 because I hadn't yet lived the experiences necessary to write it. I had not yet lost my most precious people. I hadn't been plunged into my own abyss. We hadn't yet seen the rise of distrust and hate to the level that we see right now. All of that had to come together at the same time for this book to come to be. I have learned that a book has to come in its time. Graciela and Jorge will take you on their journey to save the world from a horrible spirit armed with a potent harpoon that could ruin the world's balance. I hope these characters will offer kids a way to talk about how they face the dark unknown, the unfair, the intolerable. I hope it will let them consider values like courage and loyalty and community, and why those old-fashioned sounding things might make life worth living. We're getting close to time, so I'm going to end with this. As I look into the second half of my career, I'm filled with many questions, many more than I had when I first started. I still wish I was a more confident person, but I'm beginning to accept that maybe this lack of sure-footedness has its place in my creative life. It allows me to search and to go after self-inquiry. What will I write in my older years as an author? What will I write that feels authentic to my experience and my perspective now, but still relevant to someone whose eyes are far newer? How can I not become cringy? How do I give them something worth reading? And how can I keep expanding and not contracting? And in more practical terms, how can I take up the space that I've worked hard for and still lend a hand and make room for the others who are coming up behind me? These are the concerns at the second half of a writing career. And I don't have answers yet. But here's what I do know. Books nurture us and they test us, both as readers and writers. They help children grow, and they help us writers make sense of what we've lived. The key that holds us all together is finding the through line to the questions that young people and older people ask themselves alike. What we owe young readers is our best creative exploration, even when it's a frightening mess. That's where art is made, and that's where peace of mind is found, and that is where we grow and connect. That's what I've decided that children need most to see in me right now, and what they need to learn how to do themselves. They need to see what it looks like to strike out in the world as themselves, with courage and with doubt and with hurt, but also with hope and light. And I hope, my friends, that you will be doing the same. Thank you, and good night. Oh my goodness, I'm so nervous.
But you're growing.
I am growing. I'm going to take a sip of water, too.
Please do. Thank you so much. That was wonderful to hear and to experience. And now, with your grace, we'll take some questions from the audience, if there are any burning ones.
I also want to say that I've spotted some friends from Hamlin,
shout
and it
them
was
out.
everything I could do not to burst into tears.
Oh.
I'm so glad you're here. What do you want to know?
Yes.
Let me bring you.
I deeply appreciate the wisdom and compassion you convey when dealing with the Alzheimer's experience in the Mercy Suarez books. Would you please talk about your approach to this timely but difficult topic?
Would I please talk about
Your approach to this timely and difficult
Oh.
topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the approach that I take with all of it, which is just to write it as someone that age sees it. So I had to really center myself on how would an 11-year-old girl interact with this situation with her grandfather? And just that. And allowing for the child to, in the reading, to have this really strong emotional moment and then allow for rest with a school scene, with something light, with something funny, because that's their life too. You know, they go moment to moment. So that's how I wrote those scenes. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. I'm in the midst, towards the middle of reading Yaki Delgado Wants to Kick Your Ass.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, did any of that come from personal experience? It had me thinking about my middle school years, and
Yes.
yeah, I experienced a little bit of that.
Yes. Did somebody want to kick your ass? The same thing happened to me. Yeah, and I want to tell you something funny. I remember in the slide where I had Dr. Hayden and we were having a laugh. So in my inauguration, we were talking about it, and she said she had the same experience in middle school. Somebody was after her, you know, with the same sort of expression. Yeah. It's amazing to me that the book is 10 years old. So it just had its anniversary edition, both in prose, and then a graphic novel version of it has come out, which is very interesting for me to see how the storytelling the same story told in these two different formats. It have different scenes have taken on a different weight in each one of them. It's been really remarkable for me to compare them. But yeah, it was from personal experience. The first chapter is pretty much exactly the experience as it was. And then everything else got stretched and fabricated. I would have loved to have had, for example, a Leela in my life who would march up to the school and threaten to brain somebody on my behalf. We all want a strong person, right? Like, that's your fantasy person. My relationship with my mom was often difficult when I was a teenager, and we were often at odds. So when I was drawing Ma in that novel, that was easy to grab those feelings and those scenes of my mother and me, distrust between us, and just, you know, life in Queens at the time. I think the hardest part of that novel, to write it, was that I didn't want to remember myself then. It was such a terrible experience. I just wanted to put it away. But to write it, I had to unpack it again. And you have to sort of relive all those things in order to decide what you're going to take from it and reshape into something hopefully beautiful, right, at the end. So I think in writing, that ends up being a difficult thing. One of the difficult parts of being a writer, that you have to dredge up a lot inside of yourself. Even if you're writing fantasies and so on, you're still trying to access people and why people do what they do and why people are the way they are to each other and why you did X, Y, and Z. And you have to just live with all of the yuck again, you know? Yeah.
Very descriptive, thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
Oh, here. Let me bring you the mic. Just thank you.
Okay. I always like to hear about authors' favorite moments with kids at school visits or something that was particularly memorable for you.
Tell me the question again.
A favorite moment with kids, anything that was special for you?
Oh my gosh, there's just so many. I really did like Basil, Bixby, and Twig. And also I want to tell you that Basil loves to read, she's the oldest girl, she's 13. She loves to read books about poison. So I told her parents, I hope you're checking what you're drinking and eating in that house. So, you know, so they were just darling. I've had kids at the Library of Congress, they come in all kinds of, you know, sometimes parents have brought them, you know, their children super dressed up and the child is under so much stress, right? And the parent really wants to just, I want the conversation to be really free-flowing and the kids to feel really natural. So it's funny when the parents have another idea about that. I have loved, my favorite book talker was probably this young man who was 14 or 15 at Newburgh Public Library in New York. He was just incredible. He was so poised, and I wanted to read every book he book talked to me. And then I had a mom who was a teacher at the school, and her son, well, okay, so when I go to schools, I book talk, I show them how to book talk in a minute, you know, 3 or 4 books that I really love that I think they will like. But the deal is that 2 or 3 students have to be on stage with me, and then they book talk to me a book they think I would like. So they have to prep for this, and of course some of them panic and all of that. So this kid book talks his book, and the book is about a family divorce and the strife between the mother and the father, and he read it in the 5th grade, and he describes the book. We finish the assembly. Everyone leaves except the mother, who is the teacher. She's sitting there. And she comes up to me and she said, that year that her son was reading that book, she and her husband had split up. And she had no idea that this book had such an impact on him. And she was just flabbergasted, being in the audience and seeing her son, and her son reveal something about himself that he had kept so close through a book. And as all of us know, right, that's it. That's exactly it. That's reading, right? That's the power of seeing, feeling something, and recognizing something in the page, and then being able to have this safe place, this safe zone where you and I could talk about this safe thing that is really important to us. So those were, I think, the most memorable, but it's all been memorable. It's all been, yeah. I have a journal that I'm keeping, and I'm writing all things down because I have a terrible memory, and I am so afraid that I'm going to forget something. Yeah, it's been beautiful.
Thank you for that response and question. Anyone else? Yes.
Hi. You have such amazing range, and I'm excited to learn about this fantasy book coming out next year. I'm just curious, as you look forward, do you have any audiences or formats or genres that you haven't written about yet that you're finding yourself drawn to, or on a bucket list of sorts, something you'd want to try one day?
Yes, a bucket list. So I have a couple of different thoughts. So one thought is, I wonder about myself and YA. That's a question mark for me. Like, as I'm getting older and farther away from being a teenager. So that's a question mark. Like, what kind of YA would I write that feels authentic and feels true and important to them, and me, right? We both have to be happy in this relationship, otherwise I'm out. I have wanted to try to write something for screen. However, the thought of being in a room and writing with a team of people seems insane. Who could do that? I can't even imagine it. So I don't know, but I'm interested in the idea of writing visually. My friend Liz Acevedo asked me recently, would I send her a poem for something? And I did work on this poem. And it's almost ready, but I've missed her deadline. But I find myself, and I told her, Liz, I'm sorry, it's just not ready. I don't feel ready to share this. But it was beautiful, the economy of it, and the emotional, like trying to get the emotional impact just right. That felt good. But I don't know. I don't know if I have a bucket list. I think it just, as an idea comes up, I try to follow it and just see if there's anything there.
Okay, I think we're close to time, so we probably have.
Yes, there's cheese squares to be
Yeah.
had. There are snacks.
That's right.
Snacks.
So if there are no more burning questions, I'd like to thank you all on behalf of the committee for coming out tonight. Meg, thank you so much for being with us and delivering this wonderful message at the right time for so many of us working with children and with books and with healing from the process of the pandemic and all that has brought forth. So as mentioned, there are refreshments upstairs, so please join us for that. And we look forward to seeing you all next year on May 2nd for Renee Watson.
Oh, Renee! Oh, she's going to be wonderful.